10 wrestlers WWE tried to erase from history. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos, and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Number 10. Dean Ambrose. Now, if Vince McMahon had it his way, it would be Dean Ambrose who? Before Moxley became the top star in AEW, he worked in WWE as Dean Ambrose. The former WWE star made a memorable debut alongside Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns as The Shield. The Shield is without a doubt one of the best factions WWE's had in its generation. The group felt fresh and exciting, especially the epic six-man tag matches, but once the group disbanded, Ambrose would be a major star in the singles division. The pinnacle of his run saw him win the 2016 Money in the Bank ladder match and successfully cash in on Seth Rollins to become the new WWE champion. Now, Ambrose's title reign was pretty lackluster, but the booking deserved the blame for his uninspired title run. Unfortunately for Ambrose, the company clearly gave up on him as a top star because his run was going so poorly. He dropped the WWE title very quickly to AJ Styles at Backlash and floated around the mid-card scene until his injury in 2017. Fast forward to 10 months later, after Ambrose reunited with the Shield brothers, then shocked the entire WWE universe by turning heel on Seth Rollins after they won the WWE Tag Team titles. This was sadly the night that Roman Reigns announced that he was stepping away from WWE due to having leukemia. The heel turn itself was brilliant and everyone was excited to see what Dean Ambrose could do as a heel, but unbeknownst to the fans, this would be the beginning of the end for Ambrose. Somehow, WWE even screwed up the build to Dean Ambrose vs Seth Rollins, and Ambrose became a cartoon villain who was forced to do WWE's lame comedy segments, even getting an injection right in his keister. And unfortunately, his match with Seth Rollins at TLC was incredibly disappointing. The two had such amazing chemistry in 2014 that all the life was seemingly drained from the match in 2018. In January of 2019, Ambrose decided against re-signing with the company. It wasn't just his terrible heel run that made him decide to quit. Apparently, Ambrose had been fighting with creative and Vince behind the scenes for years. It was immediately clear that Vince McMahon wasn't happy about it. Moxley was getting his ass handed to him by Nia Jax during his final months in WWE, and it certainly didn't get any better when he was gone. The former WWE star trashed Vince McMahon's creative genius during his time on Chris Jericho's podcast, venting his frustrations that led him to leaving the company. To make matters even worse, Ambrose signed with AEW, which confirmed that he wasn't going back to WWE anytime soon. The WWE have gone out of their way to pretend that Ambrose never existed. His wife Renee Young actually got heat when Ambrose made a cameo on WWE Backstage in 2020. They even neglected to bring up Ambrose when Renee announced the birth of her daughter Nora. Jon Moxley has essentially been blacklisted by the company, as more recently WWE created a video showcasing the history and feud of Seth Rollins vs Roman Reigns, including their time in the Shield, but WWE went out of their way to remove Dean Ambrose out of the group, and all shots of the Shield together have been cropped in order to not show too much of him. It's been extremely rare of WWE to show anything involving the former Dean Ambrose since he left in 2019. Number 2. Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit should be the least surprising name on this list. The former WWE World Heavyweight Champion certainly has a Hall of Fame career, but when news first spread about Benoit's death, Vince actually dropped his own death angle and hosted a night that featured the best of Chris Benoit's matches. But when reports confirmed that Benoit's death had been ruled as a murder-suicide, WWE quickly distanced themselves from Benoit. The triple threat match at WrestleMania 20 basically doesn't exist. Neither does their unforgettable moment of Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit celebrating as WWE and World Heavyweight Champion at the end of WrestleMania 20. Any mention of Benoit on WWE programming has been outright banned, and this goes further not only just in programming, but in their literature as well. You simply can't blame WWE for staying away from Chris Benoit because there's no justification for his actions. WWE fans had even hijacked the Thunderdome as pictures of Benoit were in the crowd audience. Obviously, they were quickly taken down, and that fan was banned from ever signing up to WWE's Thunderdome. Now, even with Vince McMahon gone, there's little doubt Triple H would ever start to showcase Chris Benoit in any sort of light on WWE programming. He's essentially been erased forever. Number 3. Jimmy Snooker. The case in Nancy Argentino was certainly a strange one. Reportedly on May 10, 1983, Jimmy Snooker called the ambulance for his girlfriend and mistress Nancy Argentino. The claim was that the young man was injured, but that turned into murder as Argentino died of traumatic brain injury. The autopsy made it very clear that this death was no accident. More than 24 bruises were found on her body, including her head, and and this painted a pattern of abuse which was backed up when Snooker was previously arrested on January 18, 1983 in Salina, New York for alleged assault. But these charges were never pressed against the former WWE star. Argentina's family hired their own lawyer and found enough evidence that deemed it to be a homicide, but the district attorney William Platt did not, and the case was ruled accidental. Despite the incident, Snooker still held his position in the WWE, and even though he wasn't featured as much on WWE television, he still had a successful career, even being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 1996. However, when the Argentino case was reopened in 2013 thanks to the newspaper The Morning Call, who raised serious questions about the strange circumstances surrounding her death, it forced the police to reopen the case. It was Snooker himself that got the police to re-evaluate what exactly happened on May 10, 1983, and in his autobiography he stated that Nancy simply slipped and fell while going to the bathroom at a rest stop. Well, sounds believable, right? Well, it could have been if Snooker didn't tell investigators a different story in 1983. Snooker told them that he and Nancy were fooling around outside their motel in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and he accidentally hit her and she fell. Snooker was soon arrested and charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter in 2015. WWE immediately wiped every trace of Jimmy Superfly Snooker, and even revoked his Hall of Fame induction. WWE made an official statement saying, "Jimmy Snooker's non-wrestling legends contract has been suspended, and we are currently removing his images from our media platforms pending the outcome of this case." Snooker did plead not guilty, but in June 2016, Snooker was ruled as unfit to stand trial. The presiding judge was told that Jimmy Snooker only had 6 months to live due to stomach cancer, and he would pass away on January 15, 2017. It seemed that after his death, WWE reinstated him into the Hall of Fame and still made a tribute to him. Number 4. China. Now, unfortunately, China didn't leave WWE on the best terms in 2001. There are several factors that fractured a relationship with the company. The first was that China found out that Triple H was having an affair with Stephanie McMahon. The former WWE Women's Champion detailed the moment she found out about Triple H and Stephanie's fling, revealing on open radio that she found a love letter addressed to Hunter. And as you can imagine, China was devastated. But that wasn't the only factor for her exit. WWE successfully turned China into a huge star, and according to Jim Ross, China felt that she deserved Stone Cold Steve Austin levels of money. WWE never caved into this demand, and they eventually fired her after negotiations fell flat. But even though her exit wasn't a good one, it wasn't the deciding factor on WWE blacklisting the ninth wonder of the world. Her decision to become an adult film star certainly did. China's venture into the seedy adult entertainment world didn't particularly align with the company's PG brand. Though WWE and Vince had done numerous deals with Playboy and in Shawn Michaels' case Playgirl, this seemed too much for WWE to handle at the time. There were points where China tried to reach out to Vince and company. In fact, she notably had her manager call WWE headquarters for a documentary, The Resurrection of China, in 2015, but the woman on the phone stated that she was instructed to not take any calls from her. They were never given a reason why. China was virtually blacklisted from WWE, and virtually wasn't mentioned until her unfortunate death in 2016. It's a shame that WWE waited until after her passing to put her in the Hall of Fame. But this, however, wasn't a sole induction, it was part of the D-Generation X stable. Currently, there are no plans to induct her as a sole inductee. Number 5. Fabulous Moolah. Fabulous Moolah is a pioneer in women's wrestling. There's no doubt that the former WWE Women's Champion deserves a place in the history books of professional wrestling, but the truth about Fabulous Moolah is that she is a terrible human being. You see, Moolah may have been an important figure for women's wrestling during a time, but the allegations against her are quite heavy. Moolah had been accused of abuse, trafficking, and facilitating rape. Numerous girls who trained under Moolah supported these claims, including former WWE wrestler Mad Maxine. The Fabulous Moolah was a real-life heel. A lot of women paid to train at her school and then went out on the road. They risked life and limb in their matches, and she repaid them with the worst kinds of abuses. She skimmed their money, she ignored women who were badly hurt, she pimped women out to creepy men, and on and on. She was not a mother figure, she was more like Kali, the Indian goddess of destruction. I met her in my early 20s, and I had never met such a monstrous person. However, there were defenders of the former WWE Women's Champion as well, namely Selena Majors and Beverly Shade. Moolah was heavily featured on WWE programming during the late 90s and early 2000s alongside Mae Young, but the backlash for the Hall of Famer didn't come until the company decided to make a female version of the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. In 2018, WWE created the inaugural Fabulous Moolah Battle Royal, but they were instantly hit with a wave of backlash. At first, Vince didn't budge and kept the name despite the ongoing criticism, but fans also sent feedback to Snickers, a sponsor for WrestleMania 34, and though it hasn't been confirmed why Vince suddenly changed his mind, it's likely due to its valuable brand not approving of the company's decision to use Fabulous Moolah's name for the Battle Royal. Now, Moolah still remains in the WWE Hall of Fame, though her name hasn't been mentioned since the WrestleMania 34 controversy. Number 6. The Ultimate Warrior. Now, the Ultimate Warrior DVD is the very definition of a hit piece. Now, let's be clear, the Ultimate Warrior wasn't exactly a great person behind the scenes. There are plenty of things that he's done, and don't paint him in a good light. For instance, Bret Hart stated in his autobiography, Hitman, My Real Life in a Cartoon World of Wrestling, the former WWE champion went out of his way to ignore a Make-A-Wish kid who had cancer. There are plenty more negative incidents that don't particularly showcase the Ultimate Warrior in a good light, but when it comes to WWE, the Warrior and Vince McMahon didn't particularly have a great relationship. The WWE Hall of Famer was fired 3 times, the first in '91 where the Ultimate Warrior held a figurative gun to Vince McMahon's head, and at least according to the former CEO in a 2005 documentary, the Warrior had asked for $550,000 for WrestleMania 7, guaranteed days off and equal payoffs for shows and merchandise as Hulk Hogan. Vince initially played along and agreed to his demands until after his SummerSlam match where Vince suspended and then fired the Warrior. The Hall of Famer came back years later, but he was released due to a failed drug test. He then returned to WWE in 1996. He got a huge win over Triple H at WrestleMania 12, but the Warrior was fired 3 months later due to no-showing events. The former WWE champion was not seen or talked about on WWE television for over a decade. However, officials did actually contact him to be a part of the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior documentary. The Warrior turned down the offer, but that didn't stop WWE from carrying forward and assassinating the man's character throughout the DVD. Now, it was called a self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, so naturally WWE were going to tackle sensitive subjects regarding the former WWE star, but the things said about him were so one-sided that plenty of fans and critics blasted the company for trying to damage the former WWE champion. However, the intentions for the DVD were pure, at least that's when Bruce Pritchard said on his Something to Wrestle With podcast, but apparently not a lot of people had nice things to say about the Hall of Famer. Now, as you can imagine, the Warrior was hurt by the comments his colleagues made on the documentary. Vince McMahon and the Ultimate Warrior did make amends, and he was inducted into the 2014 Hall of Fame, but the Warrior did say that during his speech that the DVD was just wrong, that's all. It didn't make me angry, but it also was hurtful. Since the WWE inducted him into the Hall of Fame and also made a legacy award out of his name, they've tried to erase the DVD from their histories. Sure, you can find it on places like Amazon, but the company has tried their damned hardest to make sure that their 2005 documentary is swept under the rug for modern audiences. Number 7. Hulk Hogan. There was once a point where Hulk Hogan was no longer in the WWE Hall of Fame. This goes back to the Hulkster being caught using racial slurs on an audio tape in 2007 that led to him being fired and removed from the Hall of Fame. Hulk Hogan literally admitted to being a racist, and then he proceeded to say the N-word multiple times. Hogan was in hot water during this time and went on tour claiming that he's not a racist and he didn't know that he was being recorded. Even though Hogan states that he apologized backstage, many wrestlers feel that he didn't. But once Hogan allegedly made amends with the locker room backstage, WWE finally let him in back into the Hall of Fame in 2018 and he returned to WWE programming. Has been criticized by numerous WWE stars including Mark Henry, Shelton Benjamin and Kofi Kingston, who voiced their displeasure over Hogan's comments, stating that the focus was about not getting caught on camera saying the wrong thing rather than apologizing for what he said. Even though WWE reinstated Hogan, the WWE Hall of Famer just can't get past this incident. This past January, the WWE legend was booed out of the building on the very first Raw Netflix premiere. Hogan still doesn't seem to understand why people are booing him. He's chalking it up to either his political view or him playing a heel for so long. He's yet to put together that fans haven't forgotten about his non-apology over his very racist comments. Number 8. Ric Flair. Ric Flair is one of the most decorated men in professional wrestling history. However, for a brief period of time, the Nature Boy no longer existed in WWE. This happened immediately following the Dark Side of the Ring airing the Plane Ride from Hell episode in 2021, where the former world champion did not look good. The Plane Ride from Hell was a long-rumored incident that saw Scott Hall and Kurt Hennig fired, and as for Ric Flair's part, the Hall of Famer allegedly stripped off his robe in front of a flight attendant, but the most damaging part was the testimony from Heidi Doyle as she went into detail about what happened between her and Flair.
And I was in the galley. The galley is where our little kitchen area on an airplane. Ric Flair was naked in a cape only, and then he decided to come back to the galley to get a Coke, and then he wouldn't leave the galley. He had me back against the back door, and I couldn't move. I couldn't get away from him. I couldn't move. He was spinning around his penis and he wanted me to touch it, and he took my hand and put it on him. And he kept me back there for, I don't know how long, but it felt like a really long time. It wasn't short, like it was minutes. And I asked him to please stop, and he wouldn't.
Now, it didn't help that Rob Van Dam corroborated the allegations by stating that he saw the entire incident.
I remember him crowding the flight attendant, like in the aisleway back there by the bathroom where it's like real skinny and you can't fit two people through there and stuff. I remember him like crowding her and trying to make her touch him and stuff.
Now, RVD later clarified his statement by saying that he didn't see that or say that. He noted that the creative editing will have people hearing it in different ways, but regardless of his comments, it was too late for Flair. The WWE Hall of Famer was losing brand deals, and WWE opted to distance themselves by removing his merchandise from WWE Shop and pulled his image from the intro and the opening credits of WWE shows. Number 9. Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar has arguably been WWE's biggest star for over the last 2 decades. He was the youngest wrestler to win the WWE Championship at one point, and he was the first man to beat The Undertaker at WrestleMania. He's also the only man to compete in the WWE and UFC at the same time. Brock Lesnar is a valuable name, but you wouldn't know that if you were only watching WWE for the past 2 years. For the most part, Brock Lesnar has rarely been involved with controversy, apart from one failed drug test scandal in 2016, though we managed to get through that without much consequence. But Lesnar's latest scandal is huge, as he's involved in the Vince McMahon-Janelle Grant lawsuit. The former WWE employee, Janelle Grant, filed a lawsuit in January 2024 against Vince McMahon and WWE, alleging a number of abuses. Although no names were confirmed, it did state that a wrestler who was involved was also a former UFC heavyweight champion. Though there are several former UFC fighters in WWE, Brock Lesnar is the only man that has won the UFC heavyweight title, which pretty much confirmed his involvement. Lesnar's merchandise was either removed or heavily discounted on WWE Shop instantly, plus the company carefully avoided saying Lesnar's name on television. Every now and then, the status about Brock Lesnar would only be brought up in the media scrum, and Cody Rhodes did mention the former champion by name earlier this year, but Lesnar is not returning to television until this Janelle Grant lawsuit is finished. Now, currently it's unknown whether Brock Lesnar will ever return to WWE. He's approaching 50 and he's not a man that's short of cash. Whether he returns all depends on this case. And number 10, Vince McMahon. Now, how can you not have this list and not talk about Vince McMahon? For 40 years, Vince McMahon served as a chairman and CEO of WWE. There were plenty of highs and lows throughout Vince's time, but the final years in WWE saw more lows. And no one can deny his legacy in professional wrestling. He's primarily the reason professional wrestling is so popular. But for all the good that Vince McMahon has done, the Janelle Grant allegations mostly undid all of it. That's because Vince McMahon is no stranger to scandals. Whether it was the allegations from Rita Chatterton in 1992, the steroid scandal in 1993, to the hush money settlements that were the beginning of the end for Vince McMahon. But it's not just these charges that make Vince McMahon sound like a terrible human being. It's the dozens of reports about his strange behavior and treatment of his employees. However, Vince McMahon was able to escape those allegations because of his power and success. However, the former WWE CEO wasn't able to overcome the Janelle Grant lawsuit. After discovering several hush money payments that Vince gave out in 2019 to 2022, the victims remained unnamed, but Vince had disclosed $19.6 million in unrecorded payments to settle sexual misconduct claims between 2006 to 2022. Now, it's hard for WWE to ever distance themselves from the former chairman, as Vince McMahon is an integral part of the company, but WWE had no other choice, as there was no other way that they could publicly cite or defend the revelations that have come to light. WWE have even gone so far as to erase everything about Vince McMahon that they can, including not mentioning him on television at all, as well as even erasing his segments from the CM Punk pipe bomb all the way in 2014. Janelle Grant lawsuit is still ongoing, but it's doubtful that he'll ever return to WWE. But there you have it, folks. 10 wrestlers WWE tried to erase from history. Be sure to leave your comments down below. I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.